You seek out mentorship and guidance. You seek out collaboration. You have a lot of communication and transparency. You share resources, hold each other accountable spiritually.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to what I believe to be another amazing conversation with Student Leadership University's Scholar in Residence for 2024, Dr. Bill Brown. We've had a series of conversations both on our YouTube channel and at our live events at Youth Pastor Summits across the country. We've been hearing from student ministry practitioners. Some of those are in local churches, some of those are in schools, some of those are in parachurch ministries, who have submitted a lot of different questions, who have interacted with Dr. Brown at live events, and have watched all these different conversations that we've had revolving around a variety of issues, some of them moral and ethical, some of them leadership-based, some of them very worldview-based. And so it's been an amazing, amazing series of conversations. And I want to say welcome back to you, Dr. Brown, and so grateful to see your face again.
Good to see you, Dr. Crow. You're vertical, and that's always a good sign, you know?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You sound a little bit like my wife. She keeps thinking I'm going to run myself into an early grave, and so I appreciate that comment. That might have been a little prophetic. Did you get a word of knowledge there? Did you get a word of knowledge?
Yeah, well, just keep your life insurance,
yes, sir.
Keep it active and so on.
Yes, sir. Did you have a good summer, sir?
It has been really busy, too. And it's been great. A lot of good family time, a lot of good ministry time, and so on. But every day is a incredible day in Asheville, North Carolina. So,
what does August look like in Asheville?
August is it's not as nearly as warm as Orlando, Florida, or where we used to live down in Tampa area. But it's right. The leaves start turning early, usually not too much, but it's schools are already started, and that changes a lot of things. But it's not really a sports town per se. Now, parts of North Carolina are, as you can imagine. Yeah. But here in the western part in the mountains, it's just people getting in their last hikes, on the Appalachian Trail, or going to Biltmore one more time, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. It's a very artsy town, isn't it? Just kind of a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, down by the river, it's the French Broad River is what's called the River Arts District, and there are so many artists, a lot of them Christians, a lot of them not, but it's just fascinating to talk to these creative people and to see all the kinds of ways that they have ways of expressing themselves, and it's a real magnet attracting people really from all over the world.
Wow. What's the right now the average temperature in Orlando is like 91 degrees in mid-August. So before I'm probably going to be a little envious in your answer to this question. What's the average temperature in Asheville right now?
Well, the last week, every morning it was 60, 62 in the morning. But the highs have gotten up into the low 80s. And
so wow. The highs. Okay, right.
Well, but we got the altitude, too, and that helps a lot with the temperature, too.
Yeah.
Being about a half mile in the mountains.
The humidity doesn't help us at all. I'm just going to say it doesn't help us at all. So
well, every time we're down there, like I come for SLU, and I'm there, and I'm thinking, how in the world did I grow up in Central Florida? How did I do that?
Yeah, it's brutal. But, come, let's say, late September, early October through, the next late March, early April, our kids play outside. I say it this way to people who don't understand Central Florida. Our kids play outside in your winter. Like it's too. Our kids can go outside in the summer for about an hour at a time at most because it's so brutal. But for the second half of the year, when everybody's inside, because it's so cold, or they can only go out for a little bit of time because it's so cold, our kids are out all day playing. So that's kind of the difference. Well, Doc, this conversation is going to revolve around kind of two areas, and these are a series of conversations that obviously come alongside student ministry practitioners. which are traditionally called youth pastors, but a lot of people in Christian education would consider themselves in student ministry. A lot of parachurch organizations who come alongside and serve churches in student ministry capacities. So, but anybody who's a student ministry practitioner, these series of topics and conversations are designed for them. They're not designed for we're not shooting with a shotgun here. We kind of got a rifle aimed at a very significant target, if you will, and it's student ministry practitioners. And one of the topics that came up quite often, whether submitted online or in your dialogue and interaction at Youth Pastor Summit this spring, had to do with the youth pastor interacting with the parent, and the youth pastor interacting with other pastors and staff members that they served with. So today our conversation will revolve around those two areas. So I'll just start off with this. Let's say you're a student pastor at a church, and you have however many students in your student ministry, inevitably you are going to have some conviction about your role versus the parent's role in discipling that child or that student. Mm-hmm. Could you speak to that just for a moment? How should a youth pastor view a parent? Let's just start off philosophically, not getting into you got the helicopter moms and the homeschool moms and this dad that thinks everything should be competitive, and not the stereotypes, but just without the personalities involved. How should a youth pastor view parent ministry?
Well, I think successful youth ministries are really engaged with the parents, because let's face it, God gave the parents the responsibility to disciple their children, to educate their children. And what the parents are doing is they are sharing that responsibility with the church and with you as a youth pastor. And in giving that to you, they're giving a lot of trust in you. And so on. Now, what often happens, though, is the opposite of the helicopter parent is, all right, we're trusting you. Now you take it from here.
The outsourced parent.
We'll let you know if you do something wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But yeah, it's a real partnership, and a lot of times in churches and youth ministries, that's not expressed. And that should be. The church should make a big deal out of that, and the youth pastor then should be equipped and encouraged in ways that will help him or her to be able to do just that.
Right. So, as student ministry practitioners, you play a supporting role. You're the supporting cast to these main characters in this story, where a parent is to disciple their child, and of course, immediately people come up with, well, what about that single parent home, or those parents that don't that parent's always out working, so they don't have time to disciple their kid, or that child comes from a home that is not a Christian home, and one of their friends invited. So we always like to start with the exceptions, but I really appreciate what you're saying here, Doc, because what you're doing is you're starting with the model that should be. What could and what should be in our student ministries is that we elevate the idea. We're not ashamed of it because of the exceptions. We don't shy away from it because of the exceptions, but we're elevating the parental responsibility and the disciple-making process. So what would you say are how do you build and nurture that kind of a mindset in partnership with parents? Because it's not easy. Like you said, you got the helicopter parent, and then you got the outsourced parent, and you got everything in between. So how do you kind of create that partnership or foster it?
Well, a lot of it's perspective. You, instead of just viewing the child or the children of a family as separate entities, just think of them as all being part of that together with their parents, even if it's single parents. That's the environment, the social environment that they're growing up in, and stop and think about how you can and must engage the parents as much as you possibly can. You want to educate them, because most of the questions that the kids have, they're probably going to ask them at home. Maybe not always, but they're with their parents much more than they are with you. But by the same token, you want parents to be able to be a catalyst, a continuing catalyst of the ministry that you have with them at the church, and on the retreats and the discipleship groups and so on. You want the parents to be being able to say the same thing, to encourage it in a way to give that sense of a stamp of approval from mom and dad on these particular issues. But most parents don't really know what the issues are, number one, except at what age should my son get a smartphone, kind of a thing. But the issues themselves, the kids are dealing with all of them. Every kid, almost 100%, have viewed explicit pornography by the age of 14. Most of them start at 11, and it's not because they chose it; it's because all their friends are doing it. And
it's pursuing them.
It is pursuing them, and parents know nothing about it. Their kid's not going to tell them, probably, but by and large, that in many ways will change the rest of their life if they really find themselves so engaged in that and seeking out pornography and in getting with people who see that as being the goal in life or being the mark of a real man or a real woman, those kinds of things. And the idea that the parents should be aware of that, the youth pastor should help the parents be aware of that, the youth pastor should be able to help tell parents what to do when that comes up, and in fact tell the parents how they should approach their children. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? And etc. And so that you can start bringing these things out into the light, so that you can work with the parents in getting this area of their life in place before they continue beyond adolescence and puberty.
Yeah, there was a small group of probably about 12 young men that I met with on a weekly basis. Gosh, this was like 6 or 7 years ago. And there was one young man in that group who finally, after about a year of meeting with him, opened up about his porn addiction. And then we had a series of conversations, but sadly 6 months later, he tried to assault a young lady. She reported, and then the police actually had her call the guy, and it was almost like a sting operation thing, and he admitted to it on the phone, apologized to her, and they arrested him, went to jail. So here's a young man that I had spent a year and a half in a small group with once a week. How do you go from being this young man who's going, man, I'm struggling, I got this addiction, and then he ended up spending a year in jail. And I asked him this question: where did all of this begin? And this is what he told me. He said, in the 5th grade, somebody had, maybe with like a sharp edge or a pencil or a little knife, pocket knife or something, had scratched into a desktop a website that was a pornographic website. And he said, I didn't even know what porn was at that time. Had no idea what it was. But I knew how to look up a website. And so I did that one website, and he said it was a rabbit hole. I couldn't get away from it. But it's almost like we live in a world where it pursues you. And then once it has its tentacles in you, it's really hard to untether from that. And what is so surprising to me is until that young lady brought charges against him, from the 5th grade to freshman year in college, his parents had, to what you said, no idea of the struggle that was happening just down the hallway in their house. And so, this idea of what are some ways that we can help our parents get engaged, stay engaged, and be aware has got to be close to the top of the list for every youth pastor.
Yeah, and it had to be proactive. And I think this is something that you talk about a lot. You got to go to the parents. You need to set up meetings with the parents to telling them what you're going to be teaching them, and maybe even but the kids aren't there, but telling them what you're going to be teaching them and how they can be involved, and so on. And even helping them learn how to talk about these things. How to draw it out from their kids. And so, and then, have a regular way in which you are communicating to the parents of what you're teaching. Have a website or send emails out to all the parents. Here's what we're talking about. Here's what we're doing. Here's how you can be involved with them. Ask them these questions and so on. that is absolutely gold when it comes to the young person, because the people that love them most, the people that are most have the most to win in their lives are their parents and their youth pastor, and you're really able in these ways able to resource them in ways that are really important.
So I'm taking notes as I listen. I wrote down create a rhythm of meeting with the parents, but there's two purposes in that. One, here's what we're teaching. Here's where we're headed as a student ministry. Small groups, or when we have midweek Bible study, or we're going to camp, here's what we're going to be focusing on, whatever it may be. But the second big reason is to identify some of these issues. Like, hey, how do you know if your child's looking or has an addiction to pornography? What are some steps you can take to ensure that you know what they're looking at, they know what you're looking at, all those things are in place? Or breaking down an issue, like some of the sexuality issues that continually come up, but whatever the big question is, maybe you take one as a youth pastor, one big question at each meeting, and you kind of break it down, but then you place it somewhere on a platform that those parents can go back and see it and resource it. And of course, you're never going to have perfect attendance, so that parents who aren't there can also access that as well. Did I write that down right?
Yeah, that's good. And the thing too is, for example, let's say that you are going to be speaking on LGBTQ issues, and so the parents get a text from you. This is what we're going to be talking about Wednesday or whatever day, and these are the things that we're going to be talking about. Here's the questions I'm going to be asking them. Here's a link to a short video I'm showing them. And you click on that. And then here are some questions you can ask them about that kind of, you're in many ways mentoring the parents as well.
Yeah. I love the idea of the questions.
Opening up real good lines of communication between them and the kids, which is going to be lifelong.
Yeah.
So yeah, it takes some planning, but doing those kinds of things and utilizing technology as well is going to really, I think, help so much for them as they're reaching out to the kids.
I love the idea of giving parents a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 questions that they can ask their students. Maybe it's on the way home from church or over dinner or lunch, or I love that. I know our church does that, and we use those, for example, every Sunday afternoon when we sit down for lunch. So that's amazing. There's parents are either, like we said, it's either helicopter or outsourced parents and everything in between. But if you got a helicopter parent, they're going to give you a lot of unsolicited advice. And there's always some parents who are going to tell you what they think on a regular. Then there's some that aren't going to give you any feedback at all. So how do you best listen and evaluate feedback from parents?
Well, a lot of it you have to do up front. You meet with the parents and you explain to the parents what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about, how you're going to be communicating with them, and so on and so forth. Some parents won't like the fact that you're going to be talking about sexuality or LGBTQ kinds of things or racial issues or just whatever. They believe that those things aren't important. They need to know the Bible. Now, I am the first one to say, yes, you need to know the Bible.
Yes.
But these things are in many ways the fog that keeps the kids from really understanding the Bible and getting into the Bible. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
Yes, sir.
And I remember we would get into the Word. We were just at one time we were studying through Acts, which is great. We also spent time talking about what's current in music. What are the lyrics telling me, and so on, that kind of thing. And that brought those two together in ways that I think were really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have parents then that say, I don't want my son or daughter listening to that, well then that's okay. I mean, if you don't want your son or daughter, then don't have them show up. But I want you to know that we think it's really important. And it's I don't know any other way to do it, because if they're going to say that absolutely not, then we have to have approval with the pastors, the
Sure.
pastor of the church. That's what we'll talk about here in a second. But helicopter parents, even in college, Brent, you know, when you were Brian, there were no end of helicopter parents really upset about their 20-year-old son or daughter having to such and such and such and such. I'm thinking, oh, but that happens. That happens.
I'm going to be honest. The idea of having my parents reach out to a professor or anybody at a school I was attending was just a foreign concept to me. I mean, my parents would have been like, "What the heck are you doing calling me? Turn your homework in on time." I mean, you know, the idea of doing that would have been almost unacceptable in our household. Well, you know, there's all kinds of parental feedback, like we said. As we're processing parental feedback, one of the things that I think you want your parents to have an open line of communication. You do want them to know that this is a place where we do want to be. You do want to be heard. We will listen. We need your feedback. We're in partnership with you, so we want to listen. But at the same time, if you are aware that we're going to be covering something, and you don't want us to cover that issue, you do have the option that your student not attend that one night. And I remember we were doing a purity emphasis in our church, and we had I think it was a Sunday set aside for it, not midweek, but Sunday. And we were doing this purity emphasis, and I had talked. We had done a sermon series and a small group series leading up to this. This was kind of the culmination. But I had a mom come to me and she goes, "My daughter's sexually active, and I just don't want her to be embarrassed. So what should we do?" And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And she goes, "Well, I think we're just going to sit this one out, and we'll be back the next week." And I was like, okay. I mean, I don't want to beg her to come and force her student to be there. Like, does her child, her 17-year-old, and I knew her boyfriend, and yes, she needed to be there. But ultimately, that parent was like, yeah, I think we're going to sit this one out. So I think there's going to be that option for them as well.
And to remember that the parents are the ones who are ultimately responsible for them. And it's not who gets to talk to the kid or you know, who wins. Nobody wins. You know, it's the parents who decide.
Let me ask you this question. Kind of just popped into my head, but how if partnering with parents is so important, and resourcing parents is so important, and listening to parents is so important, then how does a student ministry celebrate family and not so much authority, but the role of a parent, which certainly includes authority? How do we celebrate that in such a way that we're holding that ideal up as we see as it is valued in Scripture?
Well, I think that one way to do it is to make sure that you do a lot of things that are family oriented, and that is one of the best things we did at the first church I was at was we started having family retreats rather than youth retreats. Now, we did take the youth aside and do things and so on, but the family was all there, or at least the parents and the teenagers. And that we thought that was going to be a real challenge. It was one of the best things we ever did. Parents and their kids got to sit and talk and pray and interact with what was being said in real time, you know. And that was, to me, when you talk about celebration, that was a huge celebration. Changed the church. I mean, it changed the church. And it was that's just the first thing that comes to my mind. And you can do all kinds of things, you know, on campus. But you're talking about getting bodies together and doing things and upholding this great truth from the Scriptures about family and parents and children. And there's no shortcut in doing it other than just actually doing it in ways that are really honoring to the Lord. Do things like that even in the worship service. But yeah, it's a priority, and families desperately need that kind of good PR from the church leadership.
Yeah, I would make sure that parents are present during memorable moments in student ministry.
That's a good way to put it.
And so what are those moments? Graduation's a big moment. Going from middle school to high school is a big moment. Transitional moments are big moments. Moments where big decisions are made are big moments. But where there are big moments, make sure that the celebration doesn't happen divorced from the parents. Make sure they are a key, essential ingredient in the celebration of that moment and what God is doing in that moment. Well, parents, we could talk about parents and parent ministry and parents involved in our student ministries all day long. But another question that comes up a lot, Doc, is, okay, so we live in an age, and every philosophy of ministry has its ups and its downs, has its good parts and its bad parts. Everything has an underbelly. We all have blind spots. So we're not going to get into that so much as to say we do live in an age in which there is a lot of compartmentalization in church. You got kids ministry over here. You got student ministry over here. You got a senior adult ministry over here. You got a ministry for this need over here, and then this gift set over here, and the arts over. And so we have all these different ministries that are really focused and compartmentalized. And what happens is they can become a little disjointed and disconnected if we're not careful, which leads me to this question. How do you connect a student ministry to the rest of the church or the broader vision of what God is doing in that church?
When I ask youth pastors that are in mass, I say, okay, what are the biggest challenges? Where do they arise in your ministry? And sometimes the first things they say are pastors and parents. Mm-hmm. And if they don't say that, they say parents and pastors. But the reality is that a lot of times you can have the two extremes. One is that the church pastor and the pastoral leadership are so overbearing in the youth program that you can't really do anything, spend any money, have any program without prior approval and so on. Then it just really takes literally the spirit out of what you're trying to do. And then on the other hand, they're not interested in what you're doing. They hired you. You're the expert. You do what you're going to be doing, and so on. And good luck. And I overstated that, but that sometimes they feel that like they're wondering what the church thinks about them. What does the pastor think about me and what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. And sometimes you only talk to church leadership when there's a problem of some sort. And so you need to pull together. Again, this is where you as a youth pastor need to be very, very proactive. I listed some in the article that we're going to put in the blog that we're going to put up. But need to be proactive and go and talk to the senior pastor, or if you have if it's a larger church and you have more than one, the opportunities for you to interact with them in meaningful ways are important. And it doesn't just have to be over church stuff. It doesn't have to be over just the youth ministry, but sitting down and having a regular time with the pastor on a regular basis, letting him tell you about his life and how he got into ministry, what he's doing, and what he thinks about now, and what advice he would have for you. All of those things are just really, really important, but they also draw you in personally together, right, which provides a lot of credibility and familiarity, which you really need in making some good decisions, particularly when there's difficulties. But yeah, it's a shame that a lot of youth ministries. I know when I was in my very first youth ministry years and years ago, pastor had no idea what I was doing. He was just counting heads, and that's when I started getting parents involved. We started having a Wednesday night dinner, and parents would come and cook and engage, and we started doing family retreat. All of that happened, and the pastor was oblivious and happy again that there were a lot of people showing up. But I could have used some mentoring back in those days and a sounding board, although the parents were great at that, though. In fact, some of them are still good friends after all these years. It's just really neat. Yeah But let me ask you the same question, because you deal with a lot of youth pastors, a lot of churches, and so on. What seems to be some of the keys and something that will bring a youth pastor ministry in a church together so that it works really, really well?
Well, you've outlined 8, I'll just say, for this article that's going to be posted, and I'm just going to read through them very quickly, and then I want to answer your question, because I really can't add much to this Incredible answer you've get. But you seek out mentorship and guidance. You seek out collaboration. You have a lot of communication and transparency. You share resource sharing. Hold each other accountable spiritually. You work through conflict resolution together. You demonstrate in practical ways mutual respect and appreciation for one another, and then you try to cultivate a shared learning environment. So I love these 8 points that you've outlined, where a youth pastor, really any pastor, could aim to develop some continuity with other pastors. I would keep this in mind. The only thing I'll add in response to what you've said, Doc, is a church is a family. A church staff is a team. And so if you are hired to do a job, you're part of a team. Now, it's weird because separately you're also part of this family. I get that. But when you are hired to do something, and we would call that vocational ministry, then there's some accountability to you doing that job. And so I would then frame my questions through the team lens versus the church family lens.
That's good.
How can I be a good teammate? Well, you talk about mentorship and guidance. If the coach isn't coaching you, then ask him to. It's sad to me, Doc, and I remember hearing Dr. J say this many years ago. I went, man, is that really true? Now I've discovered it to be true for myself. Most youth pastors have never been in their senior pastor's home for a meal. Well, that's sad. I mean, that senior pastor, I want to make sure that, on my team, for example, that my team has been in my home, that we have those shared moments. Now, we got hit by a hurricane 2 years ago, so we haven't been able to do that lately. But before that, for 18 years, we did. And so as soon as the house is back in order, we will. But, I mean, it's sad to me how many lead pastors have not personally connected with some of their staff members, and in particular, their student pastor. And then I think that there is something to this idea of collaboration and support, which you mentioned. If you can find ways to collaborate with other team members. So, for example, if I'm just pulling something out of a hat here, if the children's minister or pastor, whatever we're allowed to call them nowadays, but if the children's minister or pastor has, say, a VBS coming up, and they know that there's this theme, but they don't know how to stage it. They don't know how to create the atmospheric so that the children have all these different elements that are helping them to learn the theme. But the youth pastor is really good at doing that, let's say, because he's maybe put on 5 disciple nows and 7 camps, and he knows how to create atmospherics in a low-cost way to help reinforce what's being taught. Well, I think a great step would be that youth pastor go to that children's pastor and go, hey, listen, is there anything I can do to help with the staging and the atmospherics for the room when all the kids are together for the morning rally or evening rally, or would you like me just to take that off your plate and let me be, hey, I'll be your intern when it comes to that this week. Well, I think that style and approach to collaboration only creates expanded capacity among a church team. And so I think that sadly that is delegated rather than initiated most times. And so when there is a spirit of collaboration, I think the whole team just gets better. So I those first 2 points, I just want to, mentorship and guidance and collaboration and support are 2 that I would just emphasize, but asking all my questions through a team lens.
Yeah, that's such a good perspective, because when you are with other individuals who are ministers, or just even employees, all of the church, to take the step of being a servant. Now, how can I help? How can I? And being engaged. And a lot of times people believe, and even the pastors believe, that the youth pastor does not want to come to meetings. The youth pastor doesn't want to know what's all going on. He or she just wants to focus right on the students and what they're doing. And there's much to that, because it is it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But the same token, the senior pastor and the leadership needs to be aware of the fact that they are ministers and that they are helping to train those who are training the young people. That idea. We want to be a part of all that God is doing.
I remember I had a pastor call me one time. Sadly he's in heaven now, but he was a pastor of a church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, called Long Hollow Baptist Church, and they have an incredible pastor there by the name of Dr. Robbie Gallatry now, but Dr. David Landreth was their pastor prior to Robbie. And I remember he called me, gosh, had to be 15 years ago, but he called me and he had this great thick country accent. I loved it. He goes, hey, Cro-Magnum? That's what he always called me. I have no idea why, but that was my nickname. Hey, Crow, listen, the brethren, and brethren simply meant his staff. The brethren want me to speak at camp. And then he got real soft in his voice and he goes, you think I got anything to say to those students? He literally felt insecure about speaking at camp. And I went, Pastor, I think you've got a world of stuff to offer to those students. So there is a flip side to this coin, Doc. I think where there is, yes, this stereotype or assumption, I'll say, that runs one way, but there's some assumptions and insecurities that run the other way as well. I think there's a lot of pastors that go, well, I'm not relevant anymore. I don't have anything to offer anymore. I don't, and I think if the youth pastor or some people involved in student ministry would be like, hey, our students really need to hear from you. And maybe it's as simple as, would you just sit down and answer questions for our seniors going off to college about how they can succeed at college? Or, man, I've got some graduating college students that they're about to be adulting in 5 minutes. Man, could you? Or, hey, I got this group of students that want to know about how to build a healthy relationship with your significant other, and they care about marriage one day. Could we just sit down? And I'm shocked at how many serious students who are 17 and 18-year-old now, Doc, who ask me, I'm 46, about how to have a healthy marriage in the future. I'm shocked at that. I didn't get that question a lot 10 years ago. I get it a lot now from same age group, just different generations. Yeah. And so I think it's like there is some insecurity on the other side or in another seat in the organization, in the church, in which people are going, well, maybe I'm just not wanted, Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. And, every church is going to be different, different sizes, different people who attend and so on. And I know we've part of a church now where the young people, the real young ones, we probably had 2 in that church about 2 years ago, and now there's about 60.
Wow!
And so that has radically changed how we do that. God has been bringing a lot of these young couples in that are fabulous. We're trying to figure out what the church did to cause this, and they can't figure it out except God doing it.
Yeah.
I said, you need to come up with some program so you can say this program worked.
Yeah.
kind of after the fact, but still. Yeah. But the reality is when there's an environment where the young people are being encouraged to follow Christ, that has an impact on the entire church.
Yes, sir.
In a positive way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, one of the questions that came up is okay, you got pastors on staff, and there might be conflicting either visions or interpretations of the vision or direction of the church. So let me put the question this way: How do you collaborate with other pastors in your church that have these conflicting visions or understandings of what the vision is?
Yeah, that's a really tough one because it happens in a university as well. And being a former university president for a lot of years, I was the guy that decided what the vision was.
Yes, sir.
And so if you have conflicting visions, then who is going to decide? That's a huge, huge, important question to ask. And usually it falls to the senior pastor. Most senior pastors would like to, spread it around a little bit, but But by and large, somebody's going to have to decide, and you can do that through prayer and through discussion and so on and so forth. I know we've had, at the college level, we had to let some people go that did not buy into the mission, had a different mission, and that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard, but it was the right thing to do. And they flourished at another place,
Mm-hmm.
But you don't discount that, because if you let it hang on too long, then it ends up being just something that is just really, it's almost like a cancer eating inside of what could be a very vibrant church. And so good leadership will allow you to have to address that.
Yeah.
So
hopefully there's enough maturity, Doc. Would you say that hopefully there's enough maturity where if two pastors on staff, let's say the student pastor and the worship pastor, let's say they have different interpretations of the vision and direction of the church. Hopefully there's enough maturity where they go, you know what? Let's bring our lead pastor in, or elder board, or whatever, like you said, the governing authority that would go, well, we're the it's kind of our job to clarify that and determine that. So would you say that it would be a mark of maturity to go, you know what, we're not going to say, no, my version's better than your version. You're a youth pastor, I'm a worship pastor, you're Wednesday night, I'm Sunday morning, so I know better. Like, would you say it'd be a mark of maturity for both those pastors to go, let's set up a meeting with our pastor and let's discuss it?
Right. And I absolutely. And in fact, there are times when I've been invited to schools, for example, Christian schools that are struggling with their board and with their leadership team on direction and so on, and implementation of certain plans. And they asked me to come in and help them out. And I tell them right up front, you should have decided how this is going to be decided beforehand. I mean, coming in, who's in charge and who has the responsibility, or by what means are we going to make decisions about how we move ahead? And a lot of times the board has a totally different perspective, and that will eat a church alive and a ministry alive,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's deciding on all of those things beforehand is so important. But most don't, for some reason.
Yeah.
They just go along and feel like God's going to bless, and then so on, and everybody will be falling in line. It'll be great.
I remember a pastor telling me years ago, man, our church, because we didn't have a clear voice, an authoritative voice who went, nope, this is who we are, this is where we're headed, this is what we're about. Because that voice was not clear and authoritative, and because, in other words, you had a clarity vacuum, he said, we just became a church mall. And so, and I never forgot that phrase, we became a church mall. Like, so over here you can get this, and you just keep walking a little ways, you can get this. And he said, so we became so compartmentalized that we became a consumer-based ministry.
Yeah.
And he just went, there's nothing good than when you get there. And yet he would say all of that stems back to we were missing a leader, an authoritative voice who clarified the vision and kept us on track with the vision. So there's a real danger in not having that voice.
And what happens is those different departments within the church become competing departments.
Right.
And so instead of, putting our arms around each other and serving the Lord in the capacity that He's given to us with the areas of interest and expertise we have, we're saying we have more people show up than you had, and et cetera, et cetera. You're getting too much money when we're the ones. Yeah, that's a shame.
It is. Last question on this, because this is another aspect to the student pastor, youth pastor relating to other pastors. What are some ways that a student pastor can foster mentorship and discipleship even within the church staff? It's a two-part question. So, yes, you're on a team, but you also are also part of that family. So how do you foster that mentorship and discipleship even within the church staff? And then the second part of that question is, how do you how does that translate into bigger churches where you have multiple layers of staff, and smaller churches where, the church staff can fit around in a Chick-fil-A booth? I mean, you know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, I always appreciate churches where the leadership have set aside time to grow together. And they're reading a book. Usually they'll read a book or something together and get together and talk about it and pray together and so on. And the kind of thing I used to do at Bryan, just get a bunch of guys together, and we'd spend a whole year having breakfast on Fridays and talking through a book. And I'm still doing that with men, by the way. And it's great. But now within a church setting, what you're saying is we need to be discipled ourselves so that we can disciple others. And that's a very compelling way to put it. And most pastors will say, well, I have quiet time. That's all I need. And it's really not. It's really not. And I could see a youth pastor going to the head pastor saying, is it possible for us to have some time together in discipleship? Can you mentor me? And maybe we could get some of the others involved as well. And, joining our hearts in those kinds of spiritual quests and deep dives into the scriptures and difficulties in life. I remember one fellow we were talking about. I had a group of businessmen, and he was not a believer, and we were reading, the Disciplines of a Godly Man by Kent Hughes. And he came because he wanted to get these businessmen that I was meeting with to do business with him. And then we read the chapter on Christian marriage, and that's a pretty strong chapter in there. And the men were talking about it. We were at Cracker Barrel, of all places. And this guy leaned over to me during the conversation and said, "This is very disturbing." But the story goes on. Within a few weeks, though, he'd become a believer.
Wow.
And he and his wife both, and became very active. He has his own discipleship group now that he leads at Cracker Barrel.
Yes.
And so on. But sometimes that this getting together with the people that you're working with and the people that you have a vision with, and then looking to the Lord together and growing is really, really important.
Yes, sir. Well, I tell you, a lot of good ministry happens at Cracker Barrel, and so, and not just like living here in Hurricane Florida, if you will. There's been more than one occasion where we'd have a bad storm blow through, and you couldn't use the offices because there's no power, there's no nothing, and the only place in town where you could go get a hot cup of coffee and sit at a table with lighting and be able to talk to somebody was the Cracker Barrel. And so I've done ministry at Cracker Barrel when nothing else was open. I wrote 3 things down as you were talking, Doc, and I'd love for you to speak to this. When we talk about fostering the right kind of relationships that help mentor, disciple church staff, and then the second part of the question is what I want to speak to. How do we translate that into smaller churches? There's a network of they're not even really a network. It's just churches in a city in South Florida, and they decided years ago to start getting together once a month. And you know what they called it? A staff meeting from other churches. Because they said we're all part of, obviously we're all part of the Big C Church, and so it was different denominations, different sizes. I mean, you would have one of the largest churches in the country is down there, and they got 8 campuses and run over 30,000 people. But then there's another church with a couple hundred in the room, pastor whose church only runs a couple hundred. But they're all together once a month at this staff meeting, and every month a different church pastor leads the Bible study. And then also talks about an initiative their church, or a focus, or just something that's happening in their church that they're focusing on. And what has come out of that is 3 things: this community, like there's this really communal aspect among those pastors there, unlike any place I've actually seen in the country. collaboration, it's led to maybe not all of them doing one big thing together, but 4 of them doing something like, we're focusing on that too, and they'll collaborate. And then celebration. Every month, they're celebrating what God's doing in other churches, and it has been one of the most refreshing things to see. There's not been an official study done on it, but just from my observation, living in this state for over 20 years, it seems to me that the pastors of those churches are staying in those churches longer and having more fruitful ministry. And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that they're willing to go to a staff meeting, as they call it, once a month. And so it's translating into both bigger and smaller churches, this mentorship, discipleship thing. It's a beautiful thing. I'd love for you to speak to that. Community, collaboration, and celebration at the staff meeting.
I love that. A lot of times when I'm in another city, like I'm going to be down in Baton Rouge a couple weeks, and I will invariably start talking about the church, but then I'll say, how many churches are there here in Baton Rouge? And people, number, and after they give all their numbers, people trying to guess and everything, I said, there's one. There's one. Different phases, different ways of doing, but there's one. And until we really get that under our skin, we're missing the whole point of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so you sharing that story, that's exactly what I thought. Yep, that's the church. But I'd like the staff meeting. But again, they're all staff of the one church.
That's right.
And that's cool. And we should pray that God would just raise up so many pastoral leaders who would want to do that. Because, in some ways, I don't know if you know this, but sometimes there's competition among churches.
And, no, I didn't know that.
But I love the fact this guy has who knows how many thousands, and this guy has just a few hundred. But there they are together, serving together and lifting each other up in Christ. And it's just that's something that the church hasn't done in so many years. Now there are some countries where that has to happen, and they do it. But that's awesome, and it only takes 1 or 2 people with the initiative to say, "This is what we'd like to see." And then once you get it started, I think if it's organized well enough, it'll just really take on a life of its own in a good way.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you said there's some countries where that has to happen. It's interesting. The more freedom and the more comfort we have, the more opportunity for division. The more pressure and the more persecution there is, the more necessity for togetherness.
Yeah.
And if we would just remember, we love to study the book of Acts, but sometimes I think we forget a little bit of the context of some of the pressure. Yeah. And some of, or you get to 2 Timothy and you go, he's writing this letter, but there's a psychopath down the street named Nero that wants to chop his head off. I mean, sometimes we forget that there was this sense of pressure and persecution that really left the church with this undeniable idea that we are all citizens of heaven, therefore we should live worthy of the gospel of Christ.
Right.
So
that's awesome.
Beautiful thing. Staff meeting.
I love that.
Well, Doc, this has been a phenomenal conversation. We've addressed kind of 2 big aspects, parent ministry and how the youth pastor can relate to and navigate relationships with other pastors in the church and other churches in the area that they are in. So I'm looking forward to next month. And thank you so much for your willingness to continue to invest in youth. It blows me away. Every month we have these conversations, and we get to do this throughout 2024. It just blows me away that somebody at your all the accomplishments you have would go, man, I really care about youth pastors and youth workers. And it blows me away that you kind of still see yourself as one after all these years as well. So thank you. I know I say that a lot, but thank you.
Yeah, in some ways, once a youth pastor, always a youth pastor, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's good. And if anybody listening to us now, if they have some ideas or some experiences, boy, if they let us know, we'd love to share those, because that's where the best ideas come from.
Yes, sir.
It's people who've tried and succeeded, and people who've tried and failed.
Yes,
you know?
sir.
And that's how the body of Christ works. So
I love it.
Well, blessings on you, Brent. Keep things going.
Thank you, Doc.
And give our love to Chris and the kids.
Thanks, Doc. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for hanging out with us for this episode and conversation with our scholar in residence, Dr. Bill Brown. Again, as Dr. Brown said, if you have any comments or contributions to make to this conversation, please feel free to leave those in the chat below. If you have any questions that you'd like Dr. Brown to address in the few short months that we have left with him this year, please feel free to also leave those in the comments below. Until we meet again, I pray that you would wander well and shine like stars. God bless.
God bless. Take care.